Good afternoon and very warm welcome to all of you behind the screens. We have more than 800 people registered to the Sofa Talk. So if we were at one of our conferences, let's say in Bilbao last year, we would feel a very nice size of a conference room. But we are where we are, so make yourself comfortable, get a coffee and stay with us for today's Sofa Talk. We have two captains of the wind industry, Philippe Caraffion, CEO of MHI Vestas, and Alfonso Faubel, CEO onshore Siemens Gamesa. Before we start, I would like to just give you a couple of points in terms of technicalities. So the quality of this webinar will be much better if you actually close all possible browsers and applications that you have currently running on your computer. You are muted, but there is a control panel on your right hand. So you can type your question in. I'll be screening the questions. And if we don't manage to respond to all the questions, we will follow them up after the webinar. This Sofa Talk will take more or less 45-55 minutes, and the recording will be available publicly on our WindEurope website. And please bear with us in case the connection is a bit blurry or you don't, we lose it for a moment. I hope it will not happen, but still, please bear with us. And also, if you hear potentially some background noises, like 6 or 9 years old, I did bribe my kids like never before, so I hope it will not happen. Well, without any further delay, Philippe, Alfonso, good afternoon, and thank you very much for joining us on this Sofa Talk. Hello.
Good afternoon.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone.
So let's start. So this webinar is about the impact on our industry of the COVID-19. So please tell us what keeps you up at night. Philippe, let's start with you.
Well, for sure, this coronavirus has been surprising everyone, and I think it has been quite an experience as a team, as an industry to react to it. I think we had mainly three very different type of impacts. You know, we are a pure player in offshore wind, so for us, the field activities are associated with technicians that go on a vessel, and they are on rotation, so they basically are 2 weeks on duty and then they go 2 weeks home. So the brutal restriction of free travel for technicians in Europe has been creating a situation for us, because as you might imagine, we have wind farms operating in the UK, in Belgium, in the Netherlands. We even have a site under construction at the time the crisis started. So it was I would say the first big impact for us was to make sure we would understand what were the right papers. How would we be able to for our technician not only to go to work but also be able to come back from work after their rotation. The second impact was on the factory, on the manufacturing activities, where we have factories in Denmark and we have factories in the UK. And I would say, of course, there is the impact, the free circulation on the goods and the supply chain. But I would say even the fact that the virus didn't hit each country at the same time, that we had the restriction first deployed in Central Europe, and then it went to the UK with a time difference, that has been also causing some adaptation. So we could not spread a universal message or a guideline that would apply to each country at the same time. So we had to be very flexible and adaptable. And of course, the offices situation is, I think for all of us, has been a cultural change, and we have discovered that video conferences work very well, that you can work from home, or I would say you are challenged to work from home with the kids that have no school. And all of that is creating a very different atmosphere for cooperation. But I would say overall, it is so surprising as a situation that the very positive feeling we get out of this is that we reacted collectively as a team, and we have been all surprised by our sense of adaptation.
Yes, thank you very much. What about you, Alfonso? Tell us.
Yeah. Well, actually, I sleep quite well at night, fortunately. But jokes aside, in the context of COVID, I think your question is about certainly this is an unprecedented situation for anyone. Anyone to this call, anyone on this planet has never been seeing this situation. So there is no playbook for it. So what really I'm focused on personally and the entire team is, on one hand, our overriding priority is always the health and safety of employees. So we've been very, very thorough in terms of the implementation of protocols at plants, at wind farms, and the construction, at servicing. And you had some examples from Philip where, in fact, on the offshore, you have boats where they need to be taken care of, making sure that there's nobody contagious in there. And we have the same thing onshore, basically. But it is, on one hand, the responsibility we feel towards our employees and partners working with us, for us. At the same time, a need and a commitment to continue operations, to secure the jobs, to secure the future, to secure energy. We have an additional responsibility, securing energy, making sure that wind farms run and the production continues. So the fine balance between that, again, is what really is it's a focus, and that is what is taking most of our attention. Again, overriding priority, health and safety, but at the same time, we must ensure that we have continuous operation without jeopardizing the first thing. And that balance, again, for me is the key issue, and that's where you have put in most of the focus.
Yes. Thank you very much. You have both of you have global operations. How does it differ, the impact of COVID-19 depending on the country, depending on the location of your operations factories?
I can start. In fact, we have global operations that have been affected gradually. If you follow the news, COVID does not know about borders, right? Does not know about countries. Mm-hmm. But what we have seen is that country by country, starting on the east, starting in China, has flown basically all across the globe and is slowly moved from east to west. In China, we were affected because obviously is where it started, and it led our operations to shut down for a couple of weeks. But after only those 2 weeks, we slowly, gradually came back on time. The supply basis, which is right now in the bottleneck in the critical path. So that is how we are seeing where the next wave of implication, or let's say impact has. And this is our challenge on making sure that we balance our own production and catch up in the balance of the year with all those affections. As you move further to the west, we've seen there, not chronologically in that order, but India was shut down for 3 weeks and just announced an extension for another 2 to 3 weeks that will affect our operations in India, at least till the beginning of May. That means that our plants, as well as office people and all our employees, need to basically stay within the guidance of each country. In this case, India, working from home or simply not going to the plants. In Spain, where we have seen a lot of affection because of the impact of coronavirus, we have had different situations. Basically, all operations are running again, but they were shut down for 2 weeks. I'm talking about manufacturing plants. Wind farms, again, because of the reason I mentioned earlier, our responsibility to continue providing energy, especially in these times. Wind farms continue operating around the world, obviously with what I told you earlier, the absolute focus on making sure that health and safety of our employees are utmost protected. And last but not least, how we're seeing it affected as well is by supplies coming from Mexico and Costa Rica and Latin American countries in general. But we're seeing that those slowly, because country by country, they've been gradually changing their laws or basically enforcing new laws to avoid the spreading of the COVID. That has needless to say had an affection on the entire supply chain. The challenge now again is making sure that all those affections, we're able to cope with them, and through a lot of work that I can gladly explain to you later, how to rebalance that and making sure that they minimize and neglect basically that impact.
Yeah, Philippe, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I think we're not as global as onshore wind is. Of course, offshore wind is globalizing, and for us, it was a striking difference compared to the number of trips and the presence we have been spending in Asia Pacific, in Taiwan, in Japan, Vietnam, all these emerging countries for our market or even the US, and suddenly you realize that you don't have access. And we have our own people. You know, we have two parent company. One is residing in Denmark, the other one is based in Tokyo. So seeing the different stages of the virus spreading and the different reaction of the governments, I would say has been interesting to consider globally. But I would say the biggest surprise for us, because most of our activities are still in Europe, and I would say Europe and UK, is to discover how the reaction has been national and not as much as European. And so in particular for the technicians, offshore wind is very much around the North Sea. There's a good cooperation. We were encouraging the common training, the common safety standards to encourage free circulation of the technicians. And when suddenly you get to discover that you have borders in Europe again, this is kind of a very big surprise for us, because we have been using the North Sea as our common swimming pool. To some extent, it's a basin that is common, and now we discover, so maybe it's a good preparation for Brexit, you know.
Well, we have a question about efficiency. Your companies, what have you learned from this COVID-19 outbreak and the new reality and the new way of working in terms of efficiency?
I can break the ice on this one if you want to. Basically, for Siemens Gamesa, we already had a quite strong program from work from home for the office employees. So for us, we had already an infrastructure, and I must say that our guys in IT, the ones that we always bitch at, sorry for that, but they have done an outstanding job, because you should see how exponentially our video conferences have increased, literally exponentially. We have I have pretty much all our white collar employees working from home, and still operations continue. There's been no interruptions whatsoever in that sense. And this has been actually quite a for me, an awakening call. It's like there's so much efficiency that has come as a consequence of that. Obviously, your health and safety as well, by diminishing the itineraries transport back and forth to work. Teleworking it's obviously something that will continue nurturing at Siemens Gamesa. I think also the approach of, in this kind of crisis, like I said, is unprecedented. And what we have seen is that if you act fast, united, and with the real values up front, again, the health and safety of employees, but again, at the same time, trying to making sure they have continuity of work, it has been thanks to our employees in this messaging, in this understanding, their ability, their capabilities, that we have been able to continue working through enforcing very strict protocols of health and safety. So there is an ability to join forces and to cope even with this tight, very, very crisis-like, even economically crisis that will come later, that we've been able to overcome this. So this has been a learning as well, how we can interact among the different functions, the different regions, different companies in such an environment, and still maintain operations, always safeguarding the health and safety of employees.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. And Philippe, what about the factories? Because in the office environment, we all try to manage, but what about the factories? Are you operating at your full capacity?
Well, full capacity, I think it would be a challenge to be completely at 100%. But what we discovered is we started from the very simple purpose. The first messaging from all government was only critically essential business activity needs to be maintained, and otherwise people need to work from home. And so we started from the first observation. Our wind farms are producing clean power for the society. So servicing our wind farms, helping our customer producing power to the society was a critical and essential function that we had to cover. So we started from there, and we, exactly like Alfonso, we had the decision of, okay, we need to keep operating. We cannot just sit back and I think that has created a fundamental alignment or motivation to overcome the challenges. So it started from the field, but after that, since we have blade production and many processes that are difficult to stop and restart, or they are taking time because you need basically to have the chemical process that is simply taking time. We didn't really have the option to stop, wait and see, and then come back. So we tried as much as possible to maintain operation also in manufacturing. We had a couple of disruption for some components that were coming from Italy or from Spain, and we had to find alternative source for components in the assembly work, in the nacelle in particular. But we overcame all these challenges because fundamentally, if you really want to move forward, people have a remarkable sense of adaptation. And of course, like Alfonso said, in new constraints, because now you need to have 2 meter distance, you need to have a regular washing of the hands, all this social distancing in a working manufacturing environment. Well, it takes a few days to figure out how to do it, but we did it very well. So I would say we are now, in terms of presence at work and productivity, we are, I don't want to say back to before, but we are back to normal in our understanding.
Mm-hmm. Very good, thank you very much. I'm just screening the questions. There's one related to the safety and the emergency procedures. What are the biggest lessons that you've learned there in terms of the safety of the employees?
I can tell for Siemens Gamesa overall, and obviously for onshore that I represent, it's quite amazing if you think about the numbers. We are almost 25,000 employees globally, and the measures, the protocols that we implemented, both in office space, for traveling, for a wind farm operation and maintenance, as well as for construction and manufacturing plants and assembly plants. When you fully enforce them and you walk the talk of the health and safety talk, in our 25 employees, there's only 33 cases diagnosed with COVID, and they're around the whole world. And those were not even cases that came from within the plant, were people that had gone traveling on vacation, I think Austria and New York City, that kind of stuff. And overall, out of those 25,000, we've had 2 gentlemen that entered into intensive care station. One of them is out, and one of them we're really looking forward to tracking. I mean, he's hopefully coming out very soon, put it this way. But think about it, the protocols and the effort that goes into it, and making sure that we respect it. And again, the fine balance, what I told you earlier, the social distances, what you heard from Philip, that's exactly what the whole industry, what we're doing. We need to make sure that's essential, that we have the 1.5 to 2 meters separation, that we have the panels, the fiberglass panels separating. It's what you see in the department stores applied on the manufacturing, but even more stringent, the mask utilization, even going through the testing of employees, like what you had in the offshore, Philip, I think you mentioned it earlier, is you need to make sure that if people go on a boat, whether it's offshore, or if people are going to be working together in a nacelle, operation maintenance, that we provide the necessary facilities to test, making sure that we find who is potentially infected or who is not. So we have been, like I said, very forceful in the implementation of those health and safety protocols. And again, time will only tell, and no case is acceptable. Ideally, we should have no infection, but the reality is with 25,000 employees around the world, we feel that we cannot lower our guard. We need to continue that effort. But it's precisely that systematic approach towards the health and safety of employees that has been the key success so far to date, and knock on wood, that this will continue down this path.
Well, this is indeed very optimistic and positive. What about still the challenges? Do you see that? Do you see any big delays on the projects, on installations, because of this as an impact of COVID-19? Philippe?
Well, we have in offshore wind a chance. I would say that is we are a little bit longer cycle industry, and therefore a lot of what we are now facing for the next installation. For example, we have a project in the Netherlands. We don't see an immediate delay in the projects that are already, I would say, completely equipped for the mobilization of the logistics. The equipment is ready to be shipped. All of this is already, I would say, prepared for some time, and therefore there's not going to be an immediate interruption. What is a little bit more difficult for us is to understand the ripple effect on the project in maybe 9, 12, 18 months from now, because these are the projects that are trying to supply foundation, cables, substation, and I would expect that as a general impact over the different countries, there might be in the supply chain of this project some consequences. And but I would say our own mobilization, our immediate execution plan is not significantly affected as long as we are capable of operating with technicians on the vessels. And I just want to add one element to Alfonso on the safety, because of course we have only 3,500 employees, so I don't want to, but we have been actually not only discovering that we didn't have any report of a COVID-19 affected employee in our staff, but we also observed an improvement in the overall safety statistics over the last period. And simply because, exactly to your point, people are suddenly becoming quite aware that we need to pay attention. And whether you pay attention for the virus or you pay attention for safety in general, attention and engagement of each employee is actually making a huge difference in safety statistics. And I think this is the best, I would say, lesson learned, is that if we keep the communication open, we make sure we stay in contact with the people, we have clear messaging, you'd be surprised how positively the people are responding to these new challenges.
Okay, that's very positive. Now I see already the fourth time that there is a question actually about headcounts. Do you see? I don't know if you can respond to this question, but as it's been asked already several times, how do you see the impact of the current situation actually on your teams and on the headcounts of your employees?
Maybe I will answer very shortly, Alfonso. Because of the cycle time of offshore, we don't see the crisis impacting the growth of offshore wind. I mean, there is actually with the stimulus package, with the Green New Deal, on the opposite, we would expect that as offshore wind is an excellent solution to create sustainable growth in Europe, we would say that we are not planning staffing reduction because of the crisis in offshore wind. I don't want to respond for everyone here.
I can tell you our experience. Basically, if you bundle in, the question goes towards headcount, basically our workforce, right, and employment, basically, right. If you distribute it in three buckets, right, you have the people working at the offices, you have the people working in the assembly plants, you people working on projects, execution, construction, and servicing. Basically, the first ones, the office people, like I said, they're all working from home. There's business as usual. Probably tell you, I can speak for myself or everybody I talk, productivity has increased, because the time you used to spend in the morning, put your suit on, put your tie, put your shoes on, walk out, drive, go to the office and back, that's about an hour. That hour I use, or an hour and a half, I use this to do extra conference calls. And it's one after the next one. Jokingly, but it illustrates a little bit what I am feeling, but everybody I talk to, it's in the same boat. So actually productivity is increasing, fortunately. Basically, from an employment perspective, it's business as usual, but from home. The men and women working at our wind farms, whether in construction or whether servicing, in a sense, it's the same way, because only in some countries we've seen that the construction had to be halted for a couple of weeks only, and that can be recuperated easily, fast. So business will continue, and it's necessary. So we don't see the needs of any kind of headcount adjustments, if that's a question where it's coming from. And last but not least, the manufacturing assemblies. Like I mentioned, they have been stopped very limited weeks. And again, those same people that are now coming back to work, or now basically, except in India, we have pretty much all our plants running at normal standards. Those, well, pretty much are running as before. So again, I see no needs for adjustment in that sense for that reason, not whatsoever. As a matter of fact, and I like the idea of the comparison, the COVID environment, it's like you said, Philip, is helped us to reinforce the health and safety. So not only all these people are coming back and continue working, but they're doing it in an even much more health conscious environment. And that is, I think it's great. That's one of the lessons learned we're having. And this is kind of, we need to ride that wave and use that as keeping the momentum all the way.
And yes, so every crisis offers some opportunities, and you've been talking about some opportunities that you already that you already took on board, right? With people working with better standards for health and safety. What about politically? Politically, how can we? What is the opportunity for us, and what is the risk in terms of the green recovery plans, or maybe not green recovery plans? So when we look at the political landscape and political discussions, how do you think we should profile the wind industry and what the wind industry can deliver to recover the economy?
I might start, Alfonso, and I think the key message there is I think we have a responsibility. There is, everyone remembers what happened few years ago in 2008 when the banks were too big to fail, and there was a major bailout program, and we saved the banks, and everyone is still paying for it. Well, here there's an opportunity that we have actually a stimulus package that is going to be useful for not only fighting against the virus and recovering the economy, but I can say that we could think about the biggest challenge we have still, which is the climate crisis. Mm-hmm. We can talk about flattening the statistics of the people affected by the virus today, but the real curve we need to flatten is the climate, the one affecting the change in climate, and that's the reduction of the emissions. And when I look at what's going on today, I think the good thing is everyone is getting closer. I think there's every employee in our company, in our team, it's the same. We have all a feeling that we belong to each other a little bit. We are a little bit closer because we go through a challenge. I think as an industry, it's a little bit the same, where we need to collectively take the responsibility of making sure that now the virus might affect the older people, and we want to make sure that we protect the old people. Now we need to think about the climate change as the next challenge that could affect our children. So as I would say, we have a dual responsibility towards the elder people now and towards the younger people tomorrow. And as a wind industry, I think we have a real opportunity to collectively talk very loud about the opportunity. If we need to have a stimulus package, if we want to recover the industry and the economy, let's use it in a way that is sustainable for the future. So instead of being only too big to fail for the banks, we should say that the climate cause is too important to ignore.
That's it. I love that analogy, Philip. I might quote you, I might steal it from you if you allow me. My read to your question, Margosha, is, I mean, look, every crisis that we've lived in the world, and we've lived a few ones for us that are a little older, traditionally have brought a turning point, have made a turning point in the society, in industry, in the world as we know it. And the COVID outbreak is no exception. It will force us to think how we envision the world of tomorrow. This crisis, like any other crisis, will test the resilience of many players, of the industries. Mm-hmm. And the way I see this is, if you think about the competitiveness of wind, it's been demonstrated even before COVID. I mean, last year, from memory, I think 75% of all new installed capacity came from renewable energies. Why not make it 100%? So, and if you take into consideration that about 70% of new energy decisions are driven by government decisions, why not take this opportunity as a turning point? This is a unique opportunity really this crisis to make this influence from the governments into reaching really the goals that we have ahead of us in terms of CO2 emissions, thanks to the implementation of renewable energy. So this is where I see us that we can come out stronger out of this outbreak as a turning point. But we need, again, making sure that the governments around the world that are facing COVID see that, since they have so much influence in it, see that and act upon, because this is a perfect timing for that point. And we, as we're seeing it, wind industry not only is providing the energy in the short term, but will continue to be there. So why not take this really as an opportunity to accelerate it in a nutshell?
Mm-hmm. So how do we convince the governments that they should take it as an opportunity, rely on us, on the wind sector, and make it a backbone of the recovery?
I think the best way to answer this is to demonstrate through our act that we are a reliable investment channel, because any government wants to invest where we return jobs, local jobs if possible, we return sustainable growth, we introduce a more sustainable future. So we need to have a clean energy, but also a more circular economy in what we do. So the reason there is maybe some appetite for a safe or clean investment channel, I mean, just compare with other infrastructure. Who would invest in an airport infrastructure today? Probably people would wait for some time. You would probably not jump on a coal power plant either. So we need to be a complete solution, not only for our own business, but also to be able to be a solution for people, for other people to win. And what I like in at least our part is completely dependent on infrastructure. We need foundation, we need a substation, we need a grid interconnection. A grid project is a long-term infrastructure project that is driving economy to recover. You need infrastructure in the harbor. So to be completely cost competitive, the more industrial we are, not only in producing our component, but in the way we organize the logistics. How do we mutualize some hubs where we would do like in Esbjerg, we would have in Poland, or we would have in the Channel, in the UK, we would have places that we would share with our favorite competitors, Siemens Gamesa and others. How do we mutualize this major infrastructure to be able to bring more clean energy to the world? I think pushing us is not just pushing a wind industry, it's pushing an entire sector and the, I would say, the adjacent activities, the infrastructure project that can benefit from that as well. And I have to mention hydrogen, because of course, until we push for clean electrons, we will always continue pushing for cleaner energy in the power sector. But enlarging the power sector with electrification, but also going from green electrons to green molecules, and being able to, with what we call power to X, being able to drive also benefits for the heavy industries, the steel industry, the cement industry, that could turn green as well. And not to mention the fact that we would have also the oil and gas players that could play in. So the reason I would say we are a good candidate to be pushed is that we are not the only winners. If we push the wind sector, there is an infrastructure that comes along, but it's a more sustainable economy that wins, not just us.
Yeah. I mean, you heard it. I mean, how many industries, auxiliary industries, tier 2, 3 industries, offshore and onshore, wind energy, renewable energy is touching tremendously, no? And just to piggyback a little bit on your earlier question, again, we are facing, after the health crisis, there will be an economical crisis. It's already there. And it's probably going to be even bigger than the health crisis, believe it or not. That's what a lot of economists say. So this is, again, the duty, so the responsibility of governments, make sure to overcome it, to provide the tools, the guidance, and the policies needed to offset that. What better industry than the wind industry that is resilient, that is able to touch so many sectors as a way to accelerate the recovery? For me, and that is it's a very solid argument. That's the one I would utilize through associations like yourself, Magosha, to push towards our green agenda.
Yes, of course we do. We're doing it as much as we can with your support. There's a question actually about the relation with the government in this time of crisis, both in supporting you in dealing with crisis, but also how the messages that you've just mentioned. What's your feeling? How do those messages resonate with the governments?
I think we have been working already for a few years with the association, and I think what is really important is to not change the messaging, but insist on the leverage it can take in this situation. So for me, the message to the government is always the same. You need to make sure that we support the entire value chain. So I would say from technology, innovation, making sure we have prototype testing, we support R&D, we keep the leadership of the European industry in wind. This is as important as having the supply chain and having the efficient logistics, all the infrastructure that I discussed earlier, but and all the way to having a continuous pipeline of projects to make sure that the activity doesn't suffer a stop and go. We have seen the damages of the PTC in the US, for example, that has been delaying for years the real development of a local industry, a sustainable industry. So there's nothing worse than the stop and go. And the good I would say the reason I like very much Afonso is that we have between onshore wind and offshore wind, we also have a different cycle time. We have a much faster impact on the shorter time to realize onshore project, and we have also a longer term impact that can affect, if we do big interconnection of the North Sea, for example, we can open a potential long term for a much bigger growth than what we would have only onshore. So there's a gradual and continuous response that can be very strong if we combine all our industry skills.
Yeah. I have a question about coming. You both mentioned that the local element of our industry, creating jobs and making a positive local impact. There is one of the questions here about the potential impact on your supply chain and sourcing strategy. Are you thinking maybe of changing to sourcing components more locally? You're both smiling.
Because it affected the whole globe. What is locally?
Right.
I mean, one country, maybe, I'm thinking there might be a country or two that might not have been affected by COVID, but the reality is it has been all affected. But look, at the end of the day, sourcing decisions, sorry for background noise, it's happening because when I work at home. What the issue is that you have sourcing strategies that take into consideration many things. Obviously, crisis like the COVID had never been taken into consideration. But what you need to continue is down the path of making sure that you can a reliable supply of goods and services to continue producing, right? So I tell you, at the end of the day, there is lessons learned for sure, but will this bring a significant change in our sourcing strategy? Hard to say, because when you have a global impact like this, what is producing locally? You stopped here, you stopped there. You stopped everywhere.
Philippe?
Well, here again, there's a difference between offshore wind and onshore wind, just because, of course, onshore wind is much more global and very diffused, efficient supply chain in the entire world. Our supply chain is still, I would say, mainly European based, and it's now globalizing. And I would say there's a reason we have a different analysis. It's just the size and the cost of transportation of our components. that is affecting a little bit the economic evaluation of onshore versus offshore. So for the big component, I think we tend to be much more local anyway. So I don't want to say local in each country, but we will have a regional strategy, Asia Pacific, US, Europe, because the size and the weight of our components are just driving more effective local production, because the transportation cost would be too expensive. But behind this analysis, what we discover with the crisis is that globalization is a plus until you discover you are vulnerable. I think we discussed already with Alfonso, the fact that we discover, it has nothing to do with the virus, by the way, but that there is a risk of supply on the balsa that we use for the blades, is suddenly creating a dependency or a vulnerability. And so I think the crisis has been opening the eyes of everyone that it's a little bit of a pity if you have just one little piece of equipment that is missing that comes from China, and you can have the full nacelle going out of your factory. So I think not necessarily on the macro, on the big equation, but on the sensitivity of our supply chain to something that we have been ignoring in the past because it was obvious. I think the wind industry will discover, like the pharmaceutical industry that discovered that the raw material for the medicine are all coming from countries that are not our countries. And that you suddenly discover that entire part of your industry as a country or as a European continent is dependent on things that you only find in China or in the US when it relates to some technology. I think people will come out of the crisis very different in their mind. They will make sure that whatever is the problem we face tomorrow, we are going to be able at least to adapt our industrial footprint and be able to react and produce it ourselves, especially for the small stuff, because I think the big thing is what we look at carefully all the time, but the small stuff that might be the thing that you ignore until you notice that it is actually quite necessary. It's the same thing that happens, you know, everyone is going through the same observation. You know, we tend to neglect nurses, people that are in the stores at the cashier. We forget that people are cleaning our offices and all these things. But the day you have a crisis like that and everyone stays home, the people who are running the economy and the society are all the people we have been forgetting about. And I think our entire Western societies are going to wake up from this crisis, paying attention to the small details that can stop the big thing. And when it gets to people, I think it will be a recognition that the value is a little bit more distributed than what people think.
I agree with everything said, Philip, and Margosa, just to round up a little bit, was thinking out loud that the way that our customers look at us in this crisis, obviously they have choices of who they should get supply with, no? What OEM supplies them. So as we do with our suppliers, but it's precisely in the crisis periods where you demonstrate what true partnerships are. When you see that it's not a problem of your customer, but it's a problem that we need to jointly work together. And this is where, in tough times, is where the real partnerships are proven. That's true from our customers ourselves, but it's equally true to your original question, from our suppliers to us. And whereas we have dual, triple sourcing alternatives, it's precisely there in difficult times where we can learn lessons, see who really was the supplier, and based on those decisions, really, not driven by COVID, but any kind of crisis. So you make then reinforce the partnership with one supplier and another one, if that helps.
Well, I get the impression that really both of your companies are really making the most of this crisis, and there are many lessons learned. What about, we haven't discussed anything with regards to digitalization and artificial intelligence. Is that this seems like the social distances and all those restrictions, it seems like a perfect area to look at in order to increase efficiency and maybe, you know, rely more on AI or digitization, especially in this time. So what do you think about that? What are you doing in this area?
I think Alfonso already touched on it, because we all discovered how much time we save not traveling, not having to go to conferences, and having a lot of video conferences or audio connection. I think it's definitely an area that is driving a lot of productivity, and we'll use it. We keep this regardless of the future. But I think we also discovered, at least very quickly, we were fortunate enough to have installed a good video conference system before the crisis. We had no anticipation of the virus, but fortunately, we also are very thankful to our IT team that did a very good job. But what we discovered very quickly is that you want to see the people. You don't want to see a little logo with the initials, and you want to interact. And so we're still human. And I think a webinar is a new experience. But if it wasn't video conference, I think everyone will be falling asleep big time. And it's this. There's a big difference between the video and the image, the presence that you have. And so when we go into a lot of digital, I think there's fantastic opportunity. You can do quality inspection. We thought you would not do it with video. Yeah, actually you can. You can do audits with video. You have a lot of things where actually, compared to the current project execution, the visits from the customer, the inspection in the factory, there's a lot of things we should think about how we can make this more lean and more efficient in the future. But I'm a strong believer that we are human beings and we like to see each other.
There is, and I'm fully subscribed because we're on the same page, and I think that many industries are on the same one. There's one example, I think, which I think it illustrates how AI, and more than AI, but digitalization per se, is helping us. And I'm part of the crisis committee of Spain and part of the executive committee globally, right? And we meet every day, literally 7 days a week for different ones for Spain and ones for the globe. And in those committees is where we bring up new ways. That's how we're trying to figure out what else can we do to tackle, well, first of all, making sure that the health and safety of employees is enforced, business continuity, making sure that we are communicating. In those forums, long story short, sorry, what we're learning from other industries, and there's one clear example that we're looking into specifically. Think about it, what's going to happen with COVID. It's coming, but now it will go, really, right? So in some countries, we're seeing already where the first waves happen is there's a W effect. It came, gone, and it's slowly coming back, some cases. We're seeing from other industries that they're putting in place through the telephone applications that can track with all other employees who that employee has been in contact, just automatically. Same through Bluetooth. So in that, you're able to trace basically the entire group of people that a certain person that, if it turns out to be later, that gives COVID positive, they can also quarantine all 60, 70 people on a very reliable tool, a digital tool, that those people are follow up on the quarantine as well. For me, that was a quite refreshing example of the many that we're considering as add-ons, how we can further protect, in this case, our people from a health and safety perspective. Just to illustrate one example, but there's many stuff out there that we're pursuing right now as well.
Yeah. And there's one interesting question. How has the recent crisis affected the relationship between MHI Vestas and Siemens Gamesa? Have you worked together on? Before we were talking about the global world and COVID not respecting borders. What about the companies? How the industry is working together, exchanging best practices, those lessons learned? So the question here is about your two companies, but well, how do you feel about it? Is industry standing together and working together on all those different challenges that are affecting all of us?
If I want, Philip, I can. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. No, I think the best example I can give is when Denmark started to give guidelines and restrictions. We, of course, for us it was very natural to talk to the Vestas mother company, Vestas and Siemens Gamesa. Both have factories in Denmark, so of course there was a mutual coordination about what are going to be the guidelines. Do you close your factory? Do you maintain the activity? So of course, the EHS team are coordinating, the communication teams are coordinating. There's a lot that is, I would say, very common sense, but no one would understand if, and it's true for Siemens Gamesa and MHI Vestas, between OEMs, like we call them, but it's true also with our customer. Of course, Ørsted cannot decide that they keep operating a wind farm without having good coordination about what are the standards for safety, what is the new standards we put in place, like Afonso described earlier. It has created a brutal and sudden change in the entire work environment, but we don't work in our factory, we work in the customer wind farm. So of course we need to coordinate, and whether we do it naturally, because the good news about wind is everyone knows each other, and there is a good, I would say, there's mutual experience that go from one company to another. So the social network is efficient, but it is a very natural expectation that I would not make a decision for anything in Denmark without talking to Vestas, Ørsted, and Siemens Gamesa.
Yeah, I was going to illustrate a similar example for Spain, for where we've been seeing that the government, and again, this crisis has been managed country by country, so it's been a government by government guidance in terms of restrictions, et cetera, et cetera. So Spain has been one of the most affected countries, as you all well know. And as the new decrees came in that enforced the shutdown and isolation of population, obviously we were not only with MHI Vestas, in this case more on the Vestas side, but also with other players, other OEMs as well, other competitors, and other peers of ours, through our association, our Spanish Wind Association. We had to use that forum to precisely understand what the requirements were, and then making sure that the government was advised as well, and was well illustrated in terms of the affection that some of this decision might have. Therefore, to make an educated decision on what the right way forward is. So definitely there is collaboration, because at the end of the day, there's a common sense goal. And like Philip said, it's pointless that we act. I can open a factory and not another company not opening. It is a response that we are collectively doing towards a government guidance and law, but that law needs to be, again, predicated upon the knowledge they get from the sector itself.
Yes, I think with all what you said, I think you've made a very positive impression on our participants. I have a couple of questions here actually asking if you are hiring in times of crisis. So maybe I can pass those contacts to you after the call. Well, before we finish, I have one more question about the new projects. So do you see that? Do you expect the slowdown in terms of new projects coming into construction because of the low wholesale prices and because of the financing challenges? Do you see that as a big issue?
My answer is very simple: no, because again, of the cycle time. You know, the next auction in the UK is going to be, even if it's delayed few months, what we call the CFD round 4. It seems like it could take place on schedule before the end of the year, or even if it's delayed a few months. We're talking about projects in offshore wind that are going to be installed in 25, 26, 27. So we are lucky enough to have the next 3 years, 4 years already with a good inertia in the pipeline. So the positive is it takes some time to stop, it takes some time to accelerate as well. So what would be interesting for us is to see how we can accelerate, anticipate some of the projects, because in some cases they depend on grid connection, and that's also something that could be accelerated with a stimulus package. They depend sometimes on permitting and things like that a government has some influence on. And so we believe that there's a potential for acceleration. and we don't see. But it's by nature, our industry is 3 or 4 years ahead in the commercial front, and so we can do better if we want to accelerate.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Is it the same for onshore, Alfonso?
Well, I tell you, SGRE has offshore, has onshore, has service. So at the end of the day, the result of any kind of impact is a combination of all three. And with the large size that we have, what you're trying to do is balance basically in all three business units and all three business models, basically.
Thank you very much. I have one more question before we close. There is actually a question from one of the participants. So are you ready? The question is, what new hobby you have developed sitting at home? Did you have time to develop a new hobby?
Well, I must say, this is not a new hobby, but we have a kitchen table, and we have a little net that we can play ping pong with. It's not a regular standard size, but I must say that since the crisis, I finally got back to be able to beat my son at ping pong.
Well,
congratulations.
Alfonso.
Unfortunately, I have not that good news. In fact, like I mentioned, I am working probably about 12 to 14 hours straight every day. So there is not much time for hobbies. But I tell you, however, I never cleaned so many times the kitchen in my entire life that I remember. Something that my wife, my daughter will always deny, but I insist it is true. Okay.
Now it is on the record.
Thank you for putting the pressure on us. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much for joining us on this Sofa Talk. The recording is going to be on the WindEurope website, publicly available. I'm sorry that we didn't manage to go through all the questions. We had a lot of questions. We will try to follow them up and get back to well, we'll send you some of the questions, and we will try to get back to the people that were kindly asking them during the chat. So with that, I just want to thank our wonderful Alfonso and Philippe. Wish you good luck with all the well, challenges that you are still facing. And thank you very much for this interesting chat.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for the invitation.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.